Melinda, would you like to introduce us today?
Yes, thank you for joining us for the 2023 program series, Living Well Wednesday. My name is Melinda Daly. I'm the Family Consumer Science agent in the Sunflower District, and my office is in Sharon Springs. And I will be your host for today. Our Living Well Wednesday is a virtual learning series hosted by K-State Research and Extension, Family and Consumer Sciences professionals from across the state of Kansas. Many of our topics will touch on a wide variety of essential skills that empower you and your family to live, work, and thrive. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. Be respectful and open of others throughout the presentation. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box and comments into the chat box. The Q&A box does have a feature where you can ask anonymously if you are more comfortable with that. Our monitor will make sure to go over the questions at the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded and posted to our Living Well Wednesday webpage, along with additional resources. You will be able to find all future and past programs on your website as well. Lastly, a friendly reminder, this is our last webinar for the fall series of 23. We'll kick off Winter 24 on Wednesday, January the 10th, with a new series focused on women's health topics. Join us on January 10th, 10 p.m. for Sleep is a Superpower. Be sure to check our Living Well website for additional details on registration and topics in the winter series, and to find recordings or previous webinars. Next slide. We do want to acknowledge that KSRE is an equal opportunity employer. Therefore, we do not discriminate against anyone. So if there is a special request or concern that you need to allow for us to attend, or for you to attend the programs, please reach out to us. Next slide. We want to thank our presenters for joining us today. Tristan Cope is the Family and Community Sciences agent in the Chisholm Trail District, Marion office. Monique Kerner is Family and Community Wellness agent in the Cottonwood District, which is the Hayes office. And Bradford Wiles is Child Development Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And with that, I will turn it over to our presentation team for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. I appreciate that. As Melinda had stated, I am Tristan Cope, so I'll be starting us out today. So welcome to the rapid development of baby brains and why it matters. So let's go ahead and get started within our objectives. The objectives of the presentation will be for participants to have a better understanding of brain development in young children, to identify ways to buffer toxic stress in young children, and to gain tools strengthening attachment and interacting with young children. And then lastly, to identify the importance of play during early childhood. So just a few topics of importance, but we're excited to get started today. The first years of life are a crucial time for brain development. The brain starts developing and connections are established between conception and 5 years of age. We have learned that the healthy brain development is rooted in young children and their experiences. Adults can help make a difference in supporting that brain development by creating safe, stable, and nurturing environments. So I have a question for everyone attending. If you could put in the chat box, do you think this is myth or fact that 90% of brain development happens by age 3? Myth or fact, what do we think? I see some facts right away. Any other guesses? Fact? fact. Lots of facts coming through. Yes, so this would be correct, that there is so much brain development that is happening by the time that a child is 5 years of age. But more specifically, by the time that a child is 3 years of age, that is a very crucial time period, or a sensitive time period is the word that we like to use for brain development. During this time, they have different connections that are being formed, and actually their height is growing. They have so much body changes, their weight is developing. All of these things are happening in a short amount of time, and that's why it's kind of called that sensitive period. So yes, there's 90% of brain development that's happening, but of course our brain is going to continue to develop as we age and make new connections. But this just goes to show the importance that is there for young children during that early childhood time frame. So what does brain research tell us? Brain research tells us that the brain is not fully developed at birth, that important foundations are formed before the age of 3, that the experiences we provide and that children have, it changes the shape of that developing brain, and that the early positive interactions with nurturing adults or caregivers, those are vital to that healthy brain development. So what does the brain look like and how does it work? So our brain here, and I love this image because I think it's a good graphic or good visual for us. The brain has a lot of things happening and occurring. So in order for us to understand why it's important to have these experiences, we want to take it back to the very beginning of what are the parts of the brain. So the brain is actually composed of 5 major parts. We have the brain stem, which is down here at the bottom, and that is the basic functions necessary for survival. So you're thinking like breathing, that's a necessary function for survival. You have the cerebellum, which is kind of over here, right below the brain stem. This helps to do the processes such as balance, your involuntary movement, and coordination of your motor muscles. So like raising your hand up, that's in the cerebellum. The basal ganglia, that is your voluntary movements and your cognitive functions there. When you're looking at your cerebral cortex, which is up here, this is more your thinking, your sensing, your reasoning and decision making. So thinking way up through here. And then you have your limbic system. Your limbic system is actually divided kind of into 2 parts that are inside of your brain. You first have the amygdala. The amygdala, that registers that emotion. So this is kind of where you could label it as fear or as anxiety. Those are 2 common ones that you could label. Then you also have the hippocampus. And within the hippocampus, that is the like the registration of emotions. So this is where it comes from, or maybe you could call it your memory power bank. So this is where you have that emotional connection from the amygdala, so up here, and it connects down to your hippocampus. And that's where you form those connections and you kind of have that recall. So if you think back to maybe your first experience that you can remember as a child, one of mine that I remember is actually camping with my family. And I remember waking up and I could smell the dew and I could hear the tent kind of fluttering the wind and could see the dew dripping down, and you smell that sweet smell of summer of the grass. That's coming from the hippocampus. So those are memories that I have that I'm associating to whether it's vision, whether it is your smells, whether it's your sounds. Those are where those are stored. And those work together in the limbic system to help produce that recall of that emotion or that memory. Then when you're looking at the overall view of the brain, there are 2 different hemispheres. So you have your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. Your left one uses logic and details to process a situation. It relies on patterns to make sense of the world. One way that I like to remember the left side of the brain is very specific. So if I'm thinking of the outdoor environment, I'm going to think of a single tree, and that would be my left side of the brain, a single tree and all the details of that tree. Your right side of the brain is actually the big picture, and it relies on the entire system to understand a situation. So this would be like the forest as a whole. You have your whole forest, but then your left side is that tree in that forest. A fun fact is that the left side of your brain controls your right side of the body, and then your right side of the brain controls your left side of the body. Then down the middle, where this little dashed yellow line is, that is known as the midline. So this is where it connects the two different hemispheres together of the brain, and it enables them to communicate with one another. When we're talking about the midline, and which side of the brain controls the other, this is a kind of hot topic or common phrase that we would utilize within the preschool realm to say they're crossing the midline. So I am crossing this side of my body with the other side of the body, whether it is for writing, drawing, or whether it's like big gross motor play, meaning big body play. They're rough, tumbling, jumping around, skipping. That's crossing that midline, and that's why it's kind of important there. Next, we're going to look at the different lobes that are inside each of the hemisphere. There are actually 4 different lobes of the brain that are pictured here. First, we have our frontal lobe. So this is on the very front of your brain. So question for you all, what age does this fully develop, your frontal lobe? You can type into the chat box. At what age is your frontal lobe developed? Ooh, I'm seeing some close guesses. I'm seeing some 24, 27, 25, 26, 26. Any other guesses? Ooh, we're getting real close here. So yes, I see some there for clarifications if you're male or female. Generally overall, it's by the age 25 is when your frontal lobe should be fully developed. That does play a little bit into the gender, but yes. So this right here, this is the last to develop. So if you're thinking of a small child, this is why sometimes their decision making is not quite there, or why we as adults know the answer or know right from wrong, but sometimes that's not fully developed in that frontal lobe yet. We also have the temporal lobes. Those are located right above your ear, and they're responsible for understanding processes and using language. They also help with the ability to hear. Your next lobe is the parietal lobe. This one's responsible for touch, for pain, for taste, sensations. It's for spatial perception and your body orientation. So where you're at in a room or where you're at in regards to another human being. So thinking there with young children, if they're close to you, if they're further away from you, if you're in your space, all of that is responsible for that lobe. The next one that we have is the lobe that's responsible for visual information and for processing it. This is the very back one right here. This helps you to see and identify objects and allows us to see different colors as well. So when we're looking at brain anatomy, this was just a very brief overview of the brain and of what the brain can do. But with this, the human brain is estimated to have about 100 billion nerve cells, 2 million axons, and 1 million billion synapses, making it the most complex structure, both natural or artificial on Earth. So with this, we're challenging you and providing you as caregivers or adults to make a difference in each child's life. So for that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Bradford Wiles, to give us a little brief information about stress and how stress can respond to a young child.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Tristan. I really appreciate it. There we go. So stress, I think we all understand what stress feels like, but for a definition, we're going to go with any external stimulus that threatens the balance of equilibrium, right? So our bodies want to essentially operate in harmony, and stress can and does adversely affect the extent of harmony within our bodies. I think we can all understand that, but what does that mean for us? Tristan, next slide, please. So, stressors cause both physical and psychological changes. We release a steroid called cortisol that provides us with a fight or flight or freeze response. It results in an increased heart rate, increased adrenaline, and we can really focus our attention. However, when we really focus our attention, we do so to the exclusion of other things. So we're not able to process all of the things that we might ordinarily. We will essentially get almost tunnel vision on a single element to the exclusion of everything else, even if those other things are in fact important. And I think, as we all understand, when we've been either shocked or scared, that the primitive parts of our brain take over. We sometimes, yelp or jump or just begin running immediately. And so I think we all kind of have an understanding of what it feels like, but in terms of our physiology, those processes can really interfere with the extent to which we can function with both short-term and long-term goals. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite component of this talk, and that is there are 3 levels of stress. There's positive or adaptable or adaptive stress, I should say. Sometimes we, when you think about positive stress, we talk about something like performance anxiety. So you're about to take a test. You've studied hard. You get in that zone, you know your stuff, and you do well. That is positive stress. That is stress that provides you with the extra focus and memory recall that comes along with that, so long as it's at a reasonable level. There is test anxiety where it's beyond a reasonable level. That gets into tolerable stress. It does diminish performance, though. And when I say diminish performance, not just on exams, but on everything, on attention, on memory. And it can really have some adverse effects on how we interact with our worlds, and especially how we interact with other people. Tolerable stress is a little bit, it's intense, but the difference between tolerable stress and toxic stress is duration. So tolerable stress is a stressful condition that will end after some reasonably short time period. It depends on the context and what it is, but let's just say that if you're struggling because you haven't gotten paid, but you only have 2 days till payday, that's somewhat of a tolerable stress, so long as you can make ends meet after that. However, toxic stress occurs when payday doesn't change anything for you, right? In that example, it's when you're continually stressed all the time and there's no relief for you. People in poverty often experience toxic stress. People in abusive relationships, people who have multiple risk factors typically undergo this toxic stress situation. And I think one of the best ways I've ever heard it put is the idea that you're always putting out fires, right? And the reason that really helps is that recall that in stress, you get this tunnel vision. And so what happens is you're always fighting the fires that are right in front of you, and you're focusing only on those, and you can't see the long. And that is that toxic stress situation. And as you can imagine, there's only so long we can do that. Some other examples are like being in a war zone, or being in a really high stress environment for a prolonged period. Next slide, please. So from the brain component, you have fewer synaptic connections. So our synaptic connections are those things that link our neurons, and when we don't have those connections, we don't function as well. Those survival instincts kick into gear. You get irritable, you get afraid. You can really start to attribute hostilities to things that are not hostile. And that's that hyperarousal, or sometimes we call it hypervigilance. You're always looking for the next thing that's going to hurt you. Impulsivity. And of course, if you're under stress, it's really hard to take in information, incredibly hard. And worse, it goes along with memory loss. So not only is it hard to take in information, but trying to recall the information that you have taken in is quite difficult under a prolonged or toxic stress situation. Next slide, please. So it's not all bad news. We can protect against those things. We know that compassionate, consistent, reciprocal relationships are gigantic in protecting against stress. So even though there can be stressful elements going on in your lives, for children, if you're able to maintain a consistent and loving relationship, that can really buffer them against that stress. Having a safe environment. So even if in your neighborhood it's crime ridden, it's very dangerous outside, having a safe home environment goes a long way. And then being able to practice regulating stress. So, all the things that we want to learn in early childhood really come from this ability to regulate ourselves, right? We want to regulate our emotions. We want to be able to work with other people. And, we want to be able to, have solid relationships. And when you're under stress, it can be difficult. So if you're able to practice regulating stress with trusted others, you really can go a long way. And all of this builds resilience. Resilience is both a process and a product, which is kind of hard to wrap your brain around. Pardon the pun with today's topic, but at the end of the day, having solid, connective, compassionate, loving relationships, that's what builds resiliency, and it's really founded on that trust component. Next slide, please. So I used to work in Silicon Valley, and I always, for years, I thought that the geneticists kind of had everyone beat because they could just look at our genetic code and tell us what we're going to be. But then this notion of epigenetics, and also how much experience really influences our actual brain architecture, which is what Tristan was talking about a little bit, really switched things. And so, there's this ongoing nature nurture thing, but it's not really a debate. It's really both, and it really depends on the type and the type of experience, the duration of those experiences, and the intensity of those experiences. And so, for positive protective factors, you want those ongoing, consistent, enriching experiences that are developmentally appropriate. You don't want to essentially hand a hammer to a child with a couple of nails and say, okay, build me a barn, right? That's not developmentally appropriate. I mean, not by a long shot. In fact, for a young child, I probably wouldn't give them a hammer anyway. You might regret that. But at the end of the day, you can kind of understand where, and the more time that you spend with children, where they are in this developmentally appropriate space. You want it to be challenging, but not overwhelming. In the adult world, we might talk about this as kind of a stretch goal, something that we might be able to get on our own, but something that with a little bit of help, you can get to. And, the issue there, of course, is those negative experiences when you're trying to build those positives can have some really damaging effects. Our brains are really hardwired to identify threats and catalog them so that if we experience them again, we'll know what to do. Conversely, for positive experiences, it requires a more ongoing and consistent reinforcement. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting more again to that protective component, attachment relationships are relationships that you form really early on. And they're not just like you're close, they're a long-lasting bond that you have with a caregiver or caregivers. You can certainly continue to have different attachment relationships, but it's really those early years. And Monique, I believe I'm passing to you now.
All right. Thank you, Tristan and Bradford. So our next topic that we're going to move into is play. So this is where we will apply the science of brain development to the everyday life of a child. Play is one of the most important things a child does. Through play, children explore the world, they learn valuable information, they're developing social skills, and most importantly, building those connections in the brain. And play can also be a way for parents to create that attachment that Bradford was talking about with their children. Okay, next slide. All right, so real quick in the chat box, if you would just type your favorite activity or game that you remember from your childhood. So kind of put a couple of pictures up there to maybe jog your memory. So if you wouldn't mind just putting that in the chat box, and then we'll revisit this topic in a minute. Okay, so play builds connections in the brain. So through play, you can see there are all the different things that, all the different connections that are being made in the brain. So lots of times we think that a child just needs important activities and there's just a little bit of play in there to kind of get them in between important activities. But in reality, play is one of those most essential activities children can engage in and the primary way they learn about the world. So play would incorporate all four developmental domains: cognitive, motor, language, and social emotional development. Play provides an opportunity for children to try out new materials, whether that's toys or sensory items, or different ways to move, such as swings, slides. They might explore areas they've never explored before, and they manipulate new toys or objects using their fingers and hands. Play is an opportunity to use their cognitive skills, such as cause and effect, trying out new actions and observe what happens. The iconic game is that high chair drop game with little ones. You know, they're barely able to sit up and they're dropping something over and over and over again to see if it does the same thing every time. They're like little scientists to see if they'll get the same reaction every time, and they'll try it with different objects, whether it's food, utensils, toys. Play is an important opportunity for children to practice skills and reinforce and expand their knowledge. So they can try something new and practice it over and over again until they perfect it. Children learn through repetition. So an example of this would be a puzzle. Maybe the first time you put it in front of them, you know, it takes them a while. They have to use trial and error to fit the pieces in, or work hard to make their hands twist the right way. And so the more often they do it, the easier it gets, to the point where they really don't have to use trial and error anymore. They're using that memory and they know where the pieces go and know which way their hands or wrists, fingers need to go. In the act of playing, children might accidentally try something new as well. If they have a piece of paper, they might accidentally draw a circle. And if they think it's interesting, they might want to explore and repeat that motion. And then with the repetition, they get better at making those circles. And this may spark some interest in other things, other shapes. So it creates endless possibilities for them to discover. Finally, play should be self-directed. Play gives children a chance to kind of practice decision-making and build confidence. When they're allowed to explore in their own way and be in charge of that play. You know, they can choose whether they want to play alone or with others and when to switch activities. Play also gives children a chance to role play and expand their view of the world. So simple pretend play usually emerges around 18 months to 2 years, kind of the first thing they start to do is pretend that they've got a phone and they're talking on the phone because they've seen mom or dad or another adult do that. Okay, next slide. So next we'll kind of quickly go through the different ages and what's going on. So 0 to 2, so sensory development starts in utero. Babies have senses coming on board when they're in utero. They can hear, see, smell, taste, and feel. After birth, these senses continue to develop as they learn that they're a separate person from their mother. It actually takes several months for babies to begin to understand that they're a separate entity from their mother. It also takes a few months for their vision to develop. They learn where they are in space by having tummy time and being able to move their arms and legs. And as they gain that motor strength, they might begin to roll and move away from mom or crawl away from mom. But you see them often coming back and checking in with mom to make sure that she is still there. And this shows healthy attachment as well when babies want to know where their mothers are and they're coming back and checking in with their mothers or their parents or other caregivers. Playing with babies aids this process that is both cognitive and social emotional in nature. Play teaches cause and effect, which is a cognitive skill, and play engages all of those senses. So, we talked about the drop it game. Peekaboo is teaching them that object permanence, that even when they can't see mom, she still exists. Pretend play. Rhythm activities are fun at this age. They're learning how to clap. So playing games that involve clapping. Brain development is reflected in and contributes to play. So it's important for parents to have an idea of what is appropriate for each age so that their expectations are realistic and so that they know the child isn't necessarily doing something to be naughty. It's developmentally appropriate, for them to be dropping something. So they're not just doing it to make the parent mad. And at birth, the brain weighs about 1 pound. And then by age 1, the brain is doubled in weight to about 2 pounds. Sensory motor areas are most active at 2 to 3 months. And then that frontal lobe becomes more active between 6 to 8 months. But as we discussed earlier, we know it takes a long time for that frontal lobe to fully develop. And then that visual cortex develops rapidly in the first 10 to 12 months. Next slide, please. And then age 2 to 3, the brain is continuing to grow and change rapidly. By age 3, the child's brain has about twice as many synapses as the adult brain. Play becomes more complex and refined. So this is why this period of early child is so important to get right. The brain continues to increase in weight. The brain has windows of opportunity where their brains are primed for certain learnings. So the structures of the brain that are sensitive to language production and comprehension and social emotional responses and emotions are becoming active during this time. So the brain is very malleable, and that makes learning much easier than ever throughout their lives. Their skills continue to grow, become more controlled and complex. Language develops from symbols to words to sentences. They typically have around 1,000 words by age 3 and can make a 4-word sentence. Their movements become more complex and controlled. They develop from the middle out, so they'll gain control of their head before they can gain control of their fingers. Socially, emotionally, they might begin to take turns or sometimes share, but they're still really practicing those skills. So effective play or opportunities to make choices, lots of language activities, read, sing, rhyming, repeating, do those things every day with children. Manipulating and exploring objects, art, music, pretend play, practicing fine motor, so using their fingers and eye-hand coordination, as well as matching, spatial relations, and memory. Okay, next slide. And then age 4 to 5, again, that frontal lobe is continuing to develop between 3 and 8. Those synaptic connections and motor and sensory areas are well developed, and then the pruning process actually begins around age 4. So if they aren't using certain things, then the brain thinks that we don't need them. So If you've ever watched children play, you can see by 4 to 5, they're starting to have longer attention spans and better memory, problem solving. Their language has exploded. They might be able to focus their attention some more and resist distractions. They're working on counting, patterns, sequencing, all those types of things. And then play for 4 to 5-year-olds. We're going to see more complex dramatic play that encourage cognitive development, such as counting, sorting, and working puzzles. Again, literacy skills, giving children a chance to maybe make their own books or tell their own stories. They're starting to learn, what happens first, that sequencing skill. What happens first? What happens next? What comes at the end? And then more challenging motor skills, skipping, balancing, catching, and throwing. Okay, next slide, please. So what do children need for play? You can kind of read on the slide here what they need, giving them new experiences. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be everyday places, giving them new events to go to, new people as well. Introducing them to all of those new experiences helps the brain create and strengthen those networks of connections. They need space. They need open spaces. So you might think about structuring the space where children play, considering like the arrangement of furniture or toys. So they have those open spaces. You can see the boy here, he's spread out on the floor with his trains. They need that unstructured time to play. And then most importantly, they need some support from adults. Kids don't necessarily know how to play. And so we need to be spending that time on the floor with them. And we don't want to necessarily spend that time teaching to them. We're gonna want to follow the child's lead. Talk to them about what they're doing, or ask them their opinions, thoughts, or explore with them what would happen if. So their job is to be in charge of the play. This helps them follow directions later on when you need to be the leader. If they're pushing the train on the track, you take a train and push it on the track as well. So this is just going to help them be able to focus. And if an adult is playing with them, it helps build that focus and that attention that they can give. And then most importantly, smile and take delight in them, which bolsters their self-confidence. And finally, they just need that quiet time also to process. So it's important to keep electronics off during part of the day or most of the day, depending upon how young they are. And then just giving them that chance, that transition time, giving them time to move on to a new activity to process what they're learning. Okay, next slide. This is a quote from Mr. Rogers. Probably remember him from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where again, he's just reiterating how important play is. It's not something that's optional for young children. Okay, and then next slide. Yeah, so thinking back to what you put in the chat a little bit earlier, go ahead and type in what you think that favorite childhood activity or game you had was helping you to develop or to learn. So challenging you a little bit to think about what skills you were practicing. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, yeah, yoga and dance classes. Yeah, so you were practicing lots of spatial movement and where your body is in space and how to move those big muscles. Colors. You're using your fine motor skills and creativity. Yeah, problem solving, cause and effect. Yep, board games. Definitely some problem solving skills and some emotional regulation skills as well too. Okay, next slide, please. So, as you know, we talked about earlier, the first thing that we need for kids is to ensure that physical health, safety, good nutrition as well. We need parents and caregivers that are responding sensitively and consistently to children's needs. So every time a baby cries, we're picking them up, and sometimes we have to practice remaining calm ourselves so that we can respond sensitively and consistently. Children need to know that we're always going to be there and we're going to respond in the same way every time. And providing those ongoing enriching experiences. Repetition is crucial to build those strong, complex networks of connections in our brains. So we have to be patient when that toddler brings you the same book for the 50th time to read. And then finally, babies and young children, they really don't need electronics or screen time. They need those human faces and interactions because that is how they learn. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time for babies and children under 2, and then ages 2 to 5 limiting those non-educational screen times to less than an hour a day. So next slide, please. So just some key takeaway messages. Research on the brain is continually changing. Healthy brain development is essential for all children. We're laying the groundwork for the rest of their lives in that 0 to 3 time period. So I've heard it compared to like a seedling. You know, if we take really good care of that seedling, that it can grow into a really nice, strong tree later on. If we protect it from the wind and we make sure that it gets water and nutrients and sunlight and all those types of things. So same it goes with children. They need to have that protection and those essential things being met. And then those experiences that Bradford talked about. All right, next slide. So these last few slides are just a little bit about Better Brains for Babies. You guys just got a snippet of this curriculum today, but it's a Georgia-based collaboration of state and local public and private organizations dedicated to promoting awareness and education about the importance of early brain development. Next slide. Just a little bit more. Better Brains for Babies is led by a team of collaborative partners representing more than 10 organizations that support children and families in Georgia, and other states as well, too. Just some contact information, and we're ready for questions.
And I did see in the Q&A, both Monique and Bradford, if you want to drop your emails into the chat. We had a participant that had some follow-up questions or wanted a way in which to reach us. Thank you, Bradford. What additional questions do we have today? Anything coming to your mind?
I've got one. While some people might be thinking about some other questions, but what's kind of one low-hanging fruit that parents and caregivers can do every day to help their babies?
My favorite one would be read with your child. And I would say for any age. Reading, there's so much research about the benefit of reading with young children, not only for their development of communication and all the language practices, but it's also a time of bonding and forming that connection with your young child. They get to be curious. They get to snuggle in your lap with you as a caregiver. They get to be there and enjoy your presence. It's a time that you can have a beautiful conversation, a time that they can share a story and an experience with you based upon the book or just in general what happened that day. And this even goes for infants. This is all the way through. I wish we could still read to 18-year-olds in our lap, but they may not enjoy that. But honestly, Ashley, my biggest thing would be reading with young children.
I
Yeah.
agree. And reading is a great way to develop that routine as well. It's a good way for children to kind of calm down maybe before naps or bedtime. So finding some way to include reading into your daily routine.
We have a question. It says, what are some of the best ways to repair extended cortisol damage in young children?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, the thing that most matters is a loving, caring, trusting relationship in a safe environment. There's no real repair is kind of not what I would use, but I think I would say something more along the lines of like mitigate or reduce the influence of, because you can't really repair those things, but you can replace some of the ongoing cortisol flooding so that as you build these loving, trusting, caring relationships, those effects are diminished, and you typically will approach new relationships with a much better approach to things. If I may, I do want to just add one last thing to the shared reading component. It is a topic near and dear to my heart. One of the other really great benefits of reading books with children is they also develop perspective taking. So what we call theory of mind, the ability to think about other people's thoughts, beliefs, desires, intentions. And the earliest time that children experience that is really through reading books, because they can see the perspective of different characters. So it's just all around great. I do want to say, that said, any activity that you're doing together that is safe and that you are engaging in conversation and letting things happen, use whatever activity it is as a jumping off point for you to have that interaction. So to Tristan's point, like, I don't care if it's cooking or dancing or reading or, playing board games, it really is around that as an excuse to interact. The last thing I'll say is, I used to always get asked what the best toy is for Christmas, right? What's the best toy I can give my, infant or toddler? And the answer is this.
Yep.
This is it. This is the best answer. They don't care about a lot of things, but boy, your attention matters.
Absolutely.
If you have further questions, I'm just looking at time. Please feel free to reach out to Monique, Dr. Wiles, or myself. We would love to answer any more questions or provide you with more information as well. So with that, we want to have a quick second for you to complete the survey. You can take a photo with your phone of the QR link, or I believe it's dropped in the chat box as well. It'll be a quick second for you to do that.
We want to thank you, Tristan and Monique and Bradford. I'm sure many of us learned something new to take home and practice. We do encourage you all to complete our survey that she was talking about using the QR code on the screen. This will also be sent to you right after and will be available on the Living Well website. Feel free to provide comments and suggestions. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and please register for the next series of Living Well Wednesday. We hope to see you all in January. And lastly, if you would like more information or additional resources, reach out to your local extension agent. If you are not sure where your local office is, you can find it by going to ksre.kstate.edu and select statewide locations. Then hover over your county and find the location of your local office. Again, we want to thank you and have a good rest of your afternoon.